Hey everybody, welcome back to the reloading series. So just as a recap, we've done a video on annealing our brass. We've covered the dies that we're going to use. And now we're ready for our sizing operation. But before we do that, I had a comment from a viewer about how we were measuring our headspace when we set up our bushing die. So I'm using a Wilson case gauge with the micrometer top. What we do is we install the case in there, we put the micrometer top on, and we take a reading by spinning this dial. And where we stop, I don't know if you can see that, is our headspace relative to a SAMI chamber. So we're right about 3.5 or 4 thousandths over a SAMI chamber. So I annealed with primers in, and I took my initial readings with primers in. So sure enough, the Wilson instructions for the headspace gauge and the micrometer top suggest that everything be done with primers out. You could have a crater in the primer could be sitting proud in the brass, and it could skew that reading. And a viewer pointed this out to me, so I was very thankful for that. I went back and I did test the cases with and without primers, and in this case I was not seeing any difference, but we took the advice, we followed the instructions, we went ahead and decapped all our brass, and then we went ahead and tumbled it clean after that operation. So right now, we've annealed our brass. There's a video on that. We've got a video on the dies that we're going to use for this sizing process and how we measure the headspace. And we've cleaned our brass. So now we're going to do all our sizing operations in this video. So as you can see, with what I do is I've got 10 cases laid out. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take a reading on this one and set up our shoulder bump. So we're right at 4 thousandths. So we're looking for 1 to 2 thousandths shoulder bump. I've installed the Wilson bushing die, but I've removed the decapping pin, and what holds the bushing in is that area right there. All we're using this for is to bump the shoulder. So we're going to put a little case lube on. Didn't feel like we touched our shoulder, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at that one. So what we'll do is we wipe our case lube off. We go ahead and put this back in there. We're going to take another reading, and we're still at 4 thousandths, so we need to come in on that die. So we'll just come in a little bit, because I know we're pretty close from previous settings. Relube, resize. Clean and measure. Okay, so we went from 4 thousandths to 5 thousandths. What we actually saw was we saw the case grow a little bit. So we're getting close. We're not actually bumping the shoulder yet, but since we squeezed the base a little more, we've seen that case grow. So we're going to come in a little bit more, tighten everything down, a little bit of lube, one more shot through the die. So normally I'm going to reload 10 cases for this video. What I'll do is these setup cases, sometimes you'll get a little deep, you'll bump the shoulder more than you want to. They've been worked several times. We're going to keep going here. I'll use these setup cases, I'll mark them with a Sharpie. And what we'll do with these setup cases is I'll use these for foulers when I go to the range. So until we touch that shoulder, this process is just kind of a trial and error. All right, so we went from 4 to 3 right there. So we did bump a thousandths, which is acceptable. We'll make sure our die is tight on the press. Just give it a little more. We're going to mark this one as a fouler. Put it beside that other one right there. We'll go ahead and take a measurement on one of these, and this will be our verification that we're getting what we want. So right here we're about 3.5, which through experience that's where most of my cases end up, is 3.5. Go ahead and wipe that lube off. Take a quick measurement. I think we're right where we want to be. We're going to give it just a little. Now when you're doing 100 pieces of brass, once you get this measurement nailed down, I usually don't take a look anymore at what we're doing. Since we're doing 10 here, we'll go ahead and make sure we're getting what we want. We're not quite there. So that one's a solid 3 as we come in to the die. That's a solid 2. So we're bumping 1,000. So we are happy with that. Just a little bit of lube on each one of these. We'll run it through this die. Then we'll be ready for the next step in our process. Alright, so we've bumped our shoulders back. Our next step is to take care of these necks. What I'm using for that is a Wilson neck bushing die. In this instance, we're going to use a 335 bushing. So our 2 screws are undone on the top here. The one's just loosened so we can pivot that out of the way. Per the instructions, the numbers go up. So we'll fit that bushing in there. Bring this back around. Go ahead and start our screws in. Even though our decapping pin is not required, we're going to use it as an alignment tool before we tighten everything down. So what we'll do is we'll take a shell, put it in there, make sure that pin is centered, and then we're going to come back and we're going to line up these screws and go ahead and give them a real quick tightening. So we're going to use our arbor press for this. This is pretty simple. Your shell to be sized is going to go in this end until it won't go anymore. Turn that upside down, center it, and then we just press it in until it's flush. Looks like I need to tighten a little bit over here. And we flip that over, and then we use that pin to drive our brass casing out. And you can see where it's sized that portion of the neck. Now some of these I just put a light touch of lube on there. Doesn't really take much at all. And we're going to drive that case in until it's flush. Flip it. And pop it out. I think this gives us a little more precise control over the neck versus using the bushing die itself. But if you stick with us, there's only one way to find out. We're going to do that experiment. We're going to run some through the bushing die. We're going to run some this way. We're going to see what kind of difference it makes on the target. We're going to see if it makes a difference with our velocity and our seating pressure. So once you get going on this process, it really doesn't take too long. I know it seems like an added step. We're touching an additional die. And if that's what you're thinking right now, Well, you just wait a minute, because we got one more die after this that we're going to run through twice. Alright, that's it for those. So we need to remove our die that we used for a bump. The next die we're going to install is a Mandrel die. Again, this is the L.E. Wilson Mandrel die that we talked about in our die usage video. What I like to do with this one is pull it out. Make sure that mandrel looks good. And just give it a little bit of lube on there. Nothing excessive. And we'll bring that back in. And now we're going to run these cases over the mandrel die. And that sets our final diameter for the inside of the neck. This die is 0.3075. And there's not a lot of restriction as you run through here, but the idea is that we're kind of evening the inside of the neck. We're removing any inconsistencies that may exist. Bolt Action Reloading is a wonderful channel. I watched it. One of the things he said that kind of stuck with me, if I'm going to have a consistent area on my neck, I would prefer that it be the inside of my neck, because that's what grips the bullet. That's what helps set our final bullet grip before we leave the rifle. So we've run those through once. We're going to do it one more time. And that's just to make sure that it's all as even as possible. And you can still feel a little pressure as I run this through the second time. And if you examine the necks, you'll see where that mandrel has touched our sized portion. Alright, so there you have it. What we'll do is we'll wipe this brass down to get as much of that sizing wax off as we can. The next thing is we're going to trim and chamfer the brass so the necks will accept the bullet pretty easy, and then we're on to the other steps. So just in review, what we did here is we bumped the shoulder, in this case 1/1000, which will work on my rifle. That's been verified. Usually 1 to 2 thousandths is good for a bolt action, and that's what we're working with right here. Once those shoulders were bumped, we used the Wilson neck die to knock those necks down, and we used a 335 bushing. Once the necks were knocked down, we went back to the Wilson Mandrel die, which has a diameter of 0.3075, and we set the ID of those necks 3075 with that mandrel, and we ran through twice just to fix any inconsistencies we might find. We've annealed, we've deprimed, we've cleaned, we've worked our brass over, and now we're going to trim. That'll be the next video. We'll show you how we trim and we get ready for our final loading. So tune in as we continue this process, clear out to the target, which I'm hoping to show you a good target when we're done with this. Please like, subscribe, share any of these videos you want. I need comments from viewers, because this is a process that we're refining as we go along. This is kind of a test rifle to test load, as we figure out what's best, what we can do and not do. So I really appreciate the interaction. Thanks to that viewer who talked to me about the Wilson case gauge and the micrometer top. That kind of set me on the straight path there, and it did change up the way we did things. So your interaction is very important. So God bless, and I'll see you all on the other side.